The 30th Year by Ingeborg Bachmann. When a person enters his 30th year, people will not stop calling him young. But he himself, although he can discover no changes in himself, becomes unsure. He feels as though he were no longer entitled to claim to be young. And one morning he wakes up on a day which he will forget, and suddenly lies there unable to get up, struck by harsh rays of light and denuded of every weapon and all courage with which to face the new day. If he shuts his eyes in self-defense, he sinks back and drifts away into a swoon along with every moment he has lived. He sinks, and his shout does not become audible. That too has been taken from him. And he crashes down into a fathomless abyss until his senses fade away, until everything which he thought he was has been dissolved, extinguished and destroyed. But when he regains consciousness, comes trembling to his senses and becomes once more a form, a person who must shortly get up and go out into the day, he discovers in himself a wonderful new ability. The ability to remember. He does not remember as before, unexpectedly or because he wishes to, does not remember this or that at random, but with a painful compulsion recalls all his years, shallow and deep, and all the places he has occupied during these years. He casts the net of memory, casts it over himself, and draws himself, catcher and caught in one person, over the threshold of time, over the threshold of place, to see who he was and who he has become. For up to now, he has simply lived from one day to another, has tried something else each day, and has been without guile. He has been so many possibilities for himself, and has thought, for example, that he can become absolutely anything. A great man, a beacon, a philosopher, or an able man of action. He saw himself building a bridge, building a road, in khaki drill, walking wet with sweat about an area of land, surveying it, drinking thick soup out of a tin, drinking schnapps with the workmen, keeping silent. He was not a man of many words. Or a revolutionary setting fire to the rotten wooden floor of society. He saw himself fiery and eloquent, ready for every hazard. He filled people with enthusiasm. He was in prison. He suffered, failed and won the first victory. Or an idler out of wisdom, seeking every pleasure and nothing but pleasure, in music, in books, in old manuscripts in distant countries, leaning against columns. He had only this one life to live, this one ego to gamble away, avid for happiness, for beauty, made for happiness, and with a passion for everything that glittered. Therefore, he had given himself over for years to the most extreme ideas and the most fabulous plans. And because he was nothing except young and healthy, and because he still seemed to have so much time, he had said yes to every casual job. He gave private lessons to school children for a hot meal. He shoveled snow for 5 shillings an hour and studied the pre-Socratic philosophers in his spare time. He couldn't pick and choose, so he joined a firm as an apprentice, and then gave novice when he got a job with a newspaper. He was set to write reports on a new dental drill, on research into twins, on the restoration of St. Stephen's Cathedral. Then one day he set out traveling without money, hitchhiked, used addresses given to him by a lad he hardly knew who had them from a third party, stayed here and there and moved on. He tramped through Europe but then turned back in obedience to a sudden decision, prepared himself for exams leading to a useful profession, which, however, he refused to regard as his ultimate profession, and he passed the exams. At every opportunity, he had said yes to a friendship, to a love, to a demand, and everything he did was on approval, on the understanding that it could be cancelled. He felt that he could give the world notice, that he could give himself notice. Never for an instant had he feared that the curtain might rise, as now, on his 30th year, that the cue might be given for him, and that one day he might have to show what he could really think and do, and that he would have to avow his true concerns. Never had he thought that of 1,001 possibilities, 1,000 had perhaps already been squandered and missed, or that he had to miss them because only one of them was meant for him. Never had he stopped to think. Nothing had he feared. Now he knows that he too is in the trap. This year of his life begins with a rainy June. He used to be in love with the month in which he was born, with the early summer, with his constellation, with the promise of warmth and the good influences of good stars. He is no longer in love with his stars. And July is warm. He is seized with restlessness. He has to pack his bags, discard his room, his environment, his past. He has not only to travel, but also to get away. He has to be free this year, to give up everything, to change the place, the four walls and the people. He has to pay the old bills, to report his departure to a benefactor, to the police, and to his boon companions, so that he may have no ties. He has to go to Rome, back where he was most free, where years ago he experienced his awakening, the awakening of his eyes, of his joy, of his standards of judgment, and of his morality. His room has already been cleared, but a few things are still lying about, things he doesn't know what to do with. Books, pictures, prospectuses of seaside landscapes, maps of towns, and a small reproduction which he cannot remember how he acquired. L'Espérance is the name of the picture by Puvis de Chavannes, on which hope, chaste and angular, with a twig timidly putting out leaves in her hand, is sitting on a white cloth. Dabbed into the background, a few black crosses. In the distance, firm and solid, a ruin, above Hope's head. A strip of sky pink in the sunset, for it is evening. It is late and night is gathering. Although night is not shown on the picture, it will come. It will break over the picture of Hope and childlike Hope herself, and it will blacken this twig and dry it up. But that is only a picture. He throws it away. Then there is a fine silk scarf with a tear in it lying perfumed with dust. A few shells, stones which he picked up as he walked across country, not alone. A dried rose which he did not send away when it was fresh. Letters that begin with dearest, my beloved, my dear one, oh. And the fire eats them with a quick oh, and curls and crumbles their fine ashen skin. He burns all the letters. He will free himself from the people who surround him, and if possible, he will not go to new ones. He can no longer live among people. They paralyze him. They have explained him according to their own judgment. As soon as a man stays some time in one place, he is transmuted into too many shapes, hearsay shapes, and has less and less right to appeal to his own self. Therefore he wishes, henceforth and forever, to appear in his true shape. He cannot start this here, where he has been living for a long time, but he will do it there, where he will be free. He arrives, and in Rome he meets the shape that he left to the others when he was there before. It is forced onto him like a straitjacket. He raves, resists, strikes out until he sees the light and quietens down. He is left no peace because in the past, and when he was younger, he permitted himself to be different here. He will never and nowhere now be able to free himself, to begin from the beginning. Not like that. He waits. He meets Maul again, Maul who always had to be helped, Maul who otherwise doubts mankind, Maul who demands that people prove themselves by him, Maul to whom a long time ago he lent all his money, Maul who also knew Alina. Maul, now in luck, does not return the money and is consequently difficult to get on with and easily offended. Maul, who in the old days he took to all his friends, for whom he opened all doors because he was so much in need of help, has meanwhile ensconced himself everywhere and discredited him by telling stories about him, a little at a time, by repeating other people's remarks with slight distortions. Maul rings him every day and is everywhere he goes. Maul worries about him, wheedles confessions out of him which he passes on at the first street corner to the first person he meets, and calls himself his friend. Where Maul is not, there is Maul's shadow, huge and even more threatening in thoughts and fantasies. Maul without end. Maul's reign of terror. Maul himself is much smaller, is merely avenging himself astonishingly adroitly for being in his debt. This year begins badly. He becomes aware that malice is possible and that it can reach him, indeed that it has frequently come close to him before. But this time it throws itself over him violently and suffocates him. And he suddenly realizes that this malice will go on, will grow and will pervade his life. Its acid will again and again bite into him, will burn him when he is no longer prepared for it. He wasn't prepared for Maul. He must prepare for many Mauls. He already knows too many of them here and there. Only now does he see from the one Maul that there isn't only one. This year he goes mad and doesn't know whether he has ever had friends, whether he has ever been loved. A flash illumines all his ties, all circumstances, farewells, and he feels that he has been deceived and betrayed. He meets Alina again. Alina, who gives him to understand that she has forgiven him. He tries to be grateful. She herself can scarcely understand any longer why. Devoid of all understanding in her rage, she blackmailed and threatened him and tried to destroy his existence. And that was only a few years ago. She is ready for friendship, amiable, talks intelligently, considerately, with melancholy. For she is now married. In those days he had only recently separated from her, had deceived her in the silliest way, as he admitted to himself. Of the rest he thinks unwillingly, of her revenge, his flight, his losses, the restitutions, the shame, also the regret, the renewed wooing. Now she has a child. But when he unsuspectingly asks her, she admits with a smile and hesitantly that she had already become pregnant during the time of their separation. For a moment, no longer, she seems depressed. He is amazed by her calm, her nonchalance. He thinks to himself, without feeling or excitement, that her anger at that time was feigned, that she had no justification for her self-righteousness, no right to the exercise, the blackmail which he accepted in the belief that he alone was guilty. Up to now, he had believed that it was only after his departure, perhaps in order to forget, that she had gone to another man. All this time, he has believed himself guilty, and she simply allowed him to believe in his guilt. Quietly and emphatically, he breathes out the guilt and thinks, I was ill-advised in my despair, but I am even worse advised now by my clear-sightedness. I feel cold. I would rather have retained my guilt. Destruction is in process. I'll be lucky if this year does not kill me. I could visit the Etruscan tombs, drive out into the Campagna, roam the country roundabout. Rome is large. Rome is beautiful. But it is impossible to live here again, as everywhere half-friends mingle with the friends, and your friend Moll detests your friend Moll, and both of them are hard on your third friend Moll. From all sides there is pressure on the wall behind which you are seeking shelter. Although you are often wanted and needed, take a liking to others and need them yourself, all gestures are tricky and you can no longer plead headaches. They are immediately interpreted as offensive ill humor. You cannot leave a letter unanswered without being accused of arrogance, of indolence. You can no longer turn up late for an appointment without arousing anger. But how did this begin? Didn't the oppression, the regimentation by the network of enmities and friendships start years ago, soon after he allowed himself to be entangled in the web of society? In his despondency, he has not since then fashioned a double life, a multiple life, in order to be able to live at all. Is he not deceiving each and every one and frequently himself? Good origins have given him the predisposition to friendliness, to trust. His longing has been the barbaric demand for inequality, for the highest reason and insight. All he has added to this is the experience that people trespass against one, that one also trespasses against them, and that there are moments when one turns gray with affront, that everyone is affronted even unto death by others, and that everyone is afraid of death, into which alone they can escape from the monstrous affront that is life. August! There they were, the days of iron made red hot in the forge. The times resounded. The beaches were besieged, and the sea no longer rolled forward its armies of waves, but feigned exhaustion, deep and blue. On the grill in the sand roasted moiré, the easily reputable flesh of man. Before the sea, among the dunes, the flesh. He was afraid because the summer squandered itself so, because this meant that autumn would soon come. August was full of panic, full of the compulsion to snatch at life and hurry to start living. In the dunes, behind the rocks, in the bathing huts, in the cars that stood under the shadow of the pines, all the women allowed themselves to be embraced. Even in the city, behind the lowered blinds in the afternoon, they offered themselves in a half-sleep, or an hour later on the Corso they got struck with their high heels in the softened asphalt of the becalmed streets and grasped for support at a passing arm. Not a word was spoken that summer, not a name uttered. He sauntered to and fro between the sea and the city, between pale and dark bodies, from one momentary hunger to another, between sunlit foam and the beach at night, completely in the grip of summer. And the sun rolled up faster each morning and crashed earlier and earlier, before insatiable eyes down into the sea. He prayed to the earth and the sea and the sun, which were so terribly and oppressively present to him. The melons ripened. He tore them to pieces. He perished of thirst. He loved a myriad women, all at the same time and without distinction. Who am I then, in golden September, when I divest myself of everything which people have made of me? Who, when the clouds are flying? The mind which my flesh houses is an even greater deceiver than a sanctimonious host. to meet it is something I must fear above all, for nothing I think has anything to do with me. Every thought is nothing but the germination of alien seeds. I am not capable of thinking any of the things that have touched me, and I think things that have not touched me. I think politically, socially, and in a few other categories, and here and there, solitarily and pointlessly, but I always think in a game with predetermined rules, and occasionally I may also think of changing the rules. Not the game. Never. I, this bundle of reflexes and a well-educated will, I fed on the refuse of history, refuse of impulse and instinct, I with one foot in the wilderness and the other on the high road to everlasting civilization. I impenetrable, a mixture of all materials, matted, insoluble, and yet capable of being extinguished by a blow on the back of the head, silenced eye of silence. Why have I spent a whole summer trying to destroy myself in intoxication, or to intensify my feelings in intoxication, only to avoid becoming aware that I am an abandoned instrument upon which someone, a long time ago, struck a few notes on which I helplessly produce variations, out of which I try furiously to make a piece of sound that bears my handwriting. My handwriting, as if it were important for something to bear my handwriting. Flashes of lightning have passed through trees and split them. Madness has come upon men and inwardly broken them in pieces. Swarms of locusts have descended upon the fields and left the trail of their devouring. Floods have devastated hills and torrents and mountainsides. Earthquakes have not ceased. These are handwritings, the only ones. If I had not immersed myself in books, and stories and legends, and newspapers and reports, if everything communicable had not grown up in me, I should have been a non-entity, a collection of uncomprehended events. And that might have been a good thing. Then I should have thought of something new. That I can see, that I can hear, are things I do not deserve. But my feelings, those I truly deserve. These herons over white beaches, these wanderers by night, the hungry vagabonds that take my heart as their high road. I wish I could call out to all those who believe in their unique brains and the hard currency of their thoughts, be of good faith. But these coins which you clink together have been withdrawn from circulation, only you don't know it yet. Withdraw them from currency along with the images of death's heads and eagles which they bear. Admit that it's all up with the land of Greece and the land of Buddha, with enlightenment and alchemy. Admit that you are merely living in a country furnished by the ancients, that your views are only rented, the pictures of your world hired. Admit that when you really pay with your lives, you do so only beyond the barrier, when you have said farewell to everything that is so dear to you, to landing places, flying bases, and only from there do you embark upon your own path and your journey from imagined stop to imagined stop. Travelers who must not be concerned with arriving. Attempt at flight, fresh attempt at love, since to your despair an immense uncomprehended world offers itself. Let it go. Shadowy sleep, winged gaiety above abysses. When one person no longer entwines the other, lets him go quietly on his way. When the polyp man retracts his tentacle, stops devouring his neighbor. Humanity, to be able to keep one's distance. Keep your distance from me, or I shall die, or I shall murder, or I shall murder myself. Distance in the name of God. I am angry, with an anger that has no beginning and no end, my anger, which dates from an early ice age and now turns against this icy age. For if the world is coming to an end, and everyone says that it is, the faithful and the superstitious, the scientists and the prophets, one day it will come to an end. Then why should it not come to an end before it stops rotating, or before the bang, or before the last judgment? Why not out of insight and anger? Why should not this race be able to act ethically and set an end? The end of the saints, of the unfruitful fruitful, of those who truly love. For once no objection can be raised to that. He found it more and more difficult to wake up in the morning. He blinked in what little light there was, turned away, buried his head in the pillow. He asked for more sleep. Come, lovely autumn, in this October of the last roses. It is true that there is an island someone has told him about in the Aegean, on which there are only flowers and stone lions. The same flowers that in our country bloom modestly and briefly there appear twice a year, big and brilliant. The meager soil, the hostile rocks spur them on. Poverty drives them into the arms of beauty. He generally slept till far into the afternoon and got through the evening with the aid of pastimes. He rid himself of more and more ill humor during these long sleeps and gathered strength through them. Suddenly, time no longer seemed precious to him, no longer capable of being wasted. Nor did he have to do anything in particular in order to be content. There was no longer any wish or ambition that he had to satisfy in order to remain alive. It was a peculiarity of this departing year to be mean with light. Even the bright days wore gray. Now he always went to little squares, to the ghetto or to the coachman's cafe in the Trastevere, and there drank his Campari slowly, day after day at the same time. He acquired habits, cultivated them, even the smallest. He observed his ossification with approval. On the telephone he often said, "My dear friends, I'm afraid I can't manage today. Perhaps next week." The following week he disconnected the telephone. Nor would he commit himself to any promises or explanations in letters. He had spent so many useless hours with other people, and although he made no use of the hours now either, he did bend them towards him and sniff at them. He came to enjoy time. Its taste was good and pure. He wanted to withdraw entirely into himself. But nobody noticed that, or nobody wanted to perceive it. In the eyes of those around him, he still behaved extravagantly, was still one of the boys, and he often met his cloudy shape in the town and greeted it with reserve because he knew it from the past. It wasn't of today. Today he was another man. He felt good only when he was alone. He no longer made demands, demolished the edifice of his wishes, gave up his hopes, and became simpler day by day. He began to think humbly of the world. He sought a duty. He wanted to serve. To plant a tree, to procreate a child. Is that modest enough? Is it simple enough? If he were to look round for a piece of land and a woman, and he knew people who had done so in all modesty, he could leave home at 8 in the morning and go to work, occupy a place in the hive of industry, make use of the hire purchase system for furniture and the state allowance for children. He could see what he had learned rewarded each month with banknotes and use them to make a quiet weekend for himself and his family. He could help to stimulate circulation, could circle with it. He would like that, particularly to plant a tree. He could watch it through all the seasons, see it add fresh rings, and let his children climb it. He would like to harvest fruit, apples. Although he doesn't like apples, he insists on an apple tree, and to have a son that would be to his taste. Although when he sees children, it makes no difference to him which sex they are. His son would also have children, sons. But a harvest that is so far away, outside in the garden that others will take over, outside in the time in which he will no longer be alive. Horrifying thought! And here is the whole world full of trees and children, scabby, stunted trees, hungry children, and no assistance is sufficient to help them to a worthy life. Tend a wild tree, take these children to you. Do it if you can. Just protect the tree from being felled and then go on talking. Hope. I hope that nothing happens as I hope it will. I hope that if tree and child are to be given me, this will happen at a time when I have lost all hope of it and all modesty. Then I shall be glad to deal with the two of them, well and definitely, and shall be able to leave them at the hour of my death. But I'm alive. That is indisputable. Once, when he was barely 20, he had thought everything to an end in Vienna National Library and then discovered that he was alive. He lay over the books like a drowning man and thought, while the little green lamps burned and the readers crept about soft-footed, coughed softly, turned the pages softly, as though they feared to wake the spirits that dwelt between the book covers. He thought, if anyone understands what that means. He can still remember the precise moment when he was pursuing a problem of knowledge and all concepts lay loose and handy in his head, and as he thought and flew higher and higher as though on a swing without feeling dizzy, and as he gave himself the most magnificent push, he felt himself fly against the ceiling through which he had to push his way up. A feeling of happiness such as he had never known before had taken possession of him, because at this instant he was on the point of understanding something relating to everything and the ultimate. He would push his way through with his next thought. Then it happened. Then a blow struck and shook him inside his head. A pain arose that caused him to slacken. He slowed down his thinking, became confused, and jumped down from the swing. He had exceeded his capacity for thinking, or perhaps no one could go on thinking where he had been. Up above, in his head, against the roof of his skull, something was going click, click, click. The clicking was frightening and went on for several seconds. He thought he had gone mad, and clutched at his book with his hands. He let his head sink forward and shut his eyes, fainting while fully conscious. He had come to the end. He had come to the end more than ever before, more than when he was with a woman and when for an instant all the circuits in his brain were broken, when he hoped for the destruction of his individuality and felt himself enter into the kingdom of the species. For what had been destroyed here in this big old room by the light of the little green lamp in the silence of the festive feeding on letters was a creature that had risen too high, a winged being that had striven to pass through corridors filled with blue dusk to a source of light, to be exact a man, no longer as a counterpart, but as the potential accessory to creation. He was destroyed as a potential accessory, and from now on he would never be able to rise so high and touch the logic upon which the world is suspended. He knew that he had been turned away, that he was incapable, and from that hour forward, knowledge became a torment to him, because he had committed a crime there, because he had gone too far and been destroyed in the process. Henceforth he could only learn odds and ends, become a hack and keep his intelligence supple, but that didn't interest him. He would have liked to set himself up outside, to have looked over the frontier, and from there back upon himself and the world and language and every proviso. He would have liked to have come back with another language that would have been capable of expressing the secret he had discovered. As it was, all was lost. He was alive, yes, he was alive. He felt this for the first time. But he knew now that he was living in a prison, that he had to make the best of it in there and would soon rage and would have to speak this thieves' cant, the only language at his disposal, in order not to be so abandoned. He would have to ladle up his soup and on the last day be proud or cowardly, keep silent, despise or speak furiously to the God whom he could not meet here and who had not admitted him there, for if he had anything to do with this world here, with this language, he would not be God. God cannot be in this madness, cannot be in it, can only have to do with the fact that this madness is there, and that there is no end to the madness. In the winter of the same year, he had gone with Lenny into the mountains, on the racks, over the weekend, yes. He knows exactly how it was. Now he knows for the first time how it was. They had frozen, shivered, clung anxiously together in the stormy night. They had pushed the much too thin, shabby blanket alternately one to the other, and then pulled it away one from the other as they dozed. Before this, he had been to Moll's place and confided everything to him. He had run to Moll because he didn't know what to do. He understood nothing about all that. He didn't know a doctor. He didn't know his way around with himself and Lenny. Didn't know his way around with women. Lenny was so young. He was so young, and his knowledge, with which he had shown off in front of her, came from Moll, who knew his way around, or pretended to know his way around. Moll had got hold of the tablets which he ordered Lenny to take during the evening in the skiing hut. He had discussed everything with Moll, and although he felt so awful, he had let Moll envy him. A virgin, that's something I've never had in this city. Tell me all about it, old friend. He had drunk with Moll, and in his intoxication he had inhaled Moll's views. Make an end while there's still time. That's the only thing to do. Get out while the going's good. Think of the future, the stone round your neck. But in the snowy night he felt a horror of himself, of Moll, of Lenny, whom he had no longer felt like touching since he knew what lay in store for her. Never again did he want to touch that bony, colorless body, that odorless child woman, and therefore he got up in the middle of the night and went downstairs again into the guest room, sat down at an empty table and felt sorry for himself, until he was no longer alone, until the two blonde skiing girls sat down with him, until he was drunk and went upstairs with the two of them, walking behind them like a condemned man, to the same floor on which Lenny was lying awake, crying or sleeping and crying in her sleep. When he was in the bedroom with the two girls and heard himself laughing with them, everything seemed to him simple and easy. All that still existed for him. He could demand anything. It was so easy. He merely hadn't got the right attitude yet. But he would have it straight away and from now on forever. He felt that he shared a secret of easiness, of cheapness, and of unwanted wantonness. Even before he began kissing one of the girls, Lenny had already been abandoned. Even before he overcame a residue of resistance and bashfulness and went for the other one, his fear had been got rid of. But then he paid because he couldn't shut his ears to the shrill words and the mad stammer that encircled him. He couldn't turn back now, and he couldn't shut his eyes. He paid with his eyes for everything which before and afterwards it was vouchsafed him to see on those nights when a light was burning. Next morning, Lenny was gone. When he returned to Vienna, he shut himself in for a few days. He didn't go to her, and he never heard from her again. Not until years later did he enter the house in the 3rd district in which she had lived. But she no longer lived there. Even now he dared not search for her, and he would have left at once, would have fled if she had still lived there. Often he saw her in haunted hours, drifting down the Danube with a bloated face, or pushing the child in a pram through the city park. And on such days he avoided the city park. Or he saw her without a child because the child couldn't be alive. Saw her standing in a shop as a salesgirl and asking him, before she saw him, if she could help him. He also saw her happily married to a commercial traveler in the provinces, but he never saw her again. And he buried so deep inside him that it seldom rose to the surface the picture of the snowy night, of the storm, of the snow that was blown right up to the level of the little hut window, of the light that had burnt over 3 entwined bodies, and the giggling of witches and blonde hair. When religion had been hung up with one's Sunday suit, when a man has fallen into the pit he dug for another, when the proverbial has been fulfilled and all predictions regarding changes of the moon and sunset have once more been proved right, in a word, when the sum for the time being works out and everything that ought to fly in the cosmos flies, he can only shake his head and reflect upon what an age he is living in. Like everyone, he is not well informed. He knows only the smallest part, and everyone knows only a very tiny part of what is going on. He happens to know that there are robots that never make mistakes, and he knows a tram driver who once made a mistake about the time of departure and the right of way. Perhaps the stars and comets make mistakes when too much intervenes, out of absent-mindedness and weariness, and because their attention has been distracted from the old poetic delivery of their light. He wouldn't like to be up above, but he is glad that everything is continuing up above, because above is also below, so everything is continuing all round, since it cannot be halted. Nobody halts it. Thoughts are not halted, and there is no tool for their extension. It is all the same, too, whether one flies left or right through space, since everything is already flying. The earth, for instance. And if flight is in flight, it is all the better that it flies and rotates, so that we know how very much it rotates and that there is nothing to hold on to anywhere, not in the starry sky above you, but inside you, where you scarcely rise and do not join in the flight to any great extent, where there is also nothing to hold on to. But there is a stubborn, sticky mush of old questions that have nothing to do with flying, and launching pads where you can turn the rudder only jerkily and hardly perceptibly, where the morality of the whole of history is made. Because there is no morality in history itself, where you look for the morality of morality and the sum does not work out. Where a man digs a pit and falls into it himself, where you stick and twist and still stick and can get no farther, because there no light breaks for you. And of what avail is it to you than to know all about the velocity of light? Because no light breaks for you concerning the world and yourself and the whole of life and unlife and death. Because here there is only torment, because in thieves' cant you cannot find the right word and solve the problems of the world. You only solve the equation which the world also is. The world is also an equation. The equation solves itself, and then gold equals gold and dirt equals dirt. But nothing is equal to that in you, and nothing equal to the world in you. If you could give that up, could step out of your customary anguish over good and evil, and stop stirring the mush of old questions, if you had the courage to step into progress, not only into the progress from gas to electricity, from balloon to rocket, the menial improvement. If you gave up man, the old man, and took on a new one then if the world no longer went on as it does now between man and woman, between truth and lie, like truth now and lie now, if all that went to the devil, if you set out afresh the sum to which you attach value and of which you take account, if you were an airman and, without quibbling, flew your ark, if you only gave news, reports, no more the story of all that together, of yourself and another and a third, then, if you were whole and no longer wounded, injured, addicted to purity and vengeance, if you no longer believed fairy tales and were no longer afraid of the dark, if you no longer had to dare and lose or win, but do, the manipulation in the greater order, think in the order, if you were in the order, in the sum, were consumed in the bright order, then, when you no longer think that things must improve in the framework of the given, that the rich must no longer be rich and the poor no longer be poor, the innocent ought no longer to be condemned and the guilty executed, when you no longer want to console and do good and demand no more consolation and help, when pity and suffering have gone to the devil, and the devil to the devil, then, if the world is grasped where it lets itself be grasped, where it possesses the secret of rotatability, where it is still chaste, where it has not yet been loved and violated, where the saints have not yet interceded for it, and the criminals have left no patch of blood, when the new status has been created, when the succession is not acceded to in any further spirit, when at last comes at last, then jump up once again and tear down the old disgraceful order, then be different, so that the world shall change, so that it shall change direction at last, then embark upon it. When he enters his 30th year and winter comes, when a peg of ice holds November and December together and his heart freezes, he falls asleep over his agonies. He flees into sleep, flees back into waking, flees staying still and traveling, goes through the loneliness of small towns and cannot press down the latches of any more doors, cannot utter any more greetings, because he does not want to be looked at or spoken to. He would like to burrow under the earth like a bulb, like a root, to where it is still warm, to hibernate with his thoughts and feelings, to remain silent with a shriveling mouth. He wishes that all the statements, insults, promises he has uttered would become invalid, forgotten by everyone, and he himself forgotten too. But no sooner is he secured in the silence, no sooner does he fancy that he has wrapped himself up like a chrysalis, then he is no longer right. A wet, cold wind blows his absence of expectations round the corner over a flower stall filled with evergreens and flowers for the dead. And suddenly he is holding in his hands the snowdrops that he didn't want to buy. He who wanted to go empty-handed. The bells of the snowdrops begin to ring wildly and soundlessly, and he goes to where his ruin awaits him, filled with expectation as never before, with the expectation and the desire for salvation accumulated through all the years. Only now, after he has called himself calm and happy, after he has been through every believable experience, comes the unbelievable love, with the rites of death and the ritual pains that follow a different course each day. From that hour on, even before the flowers met their recipient, he was no longer master of himself, but abandoned to his fate, damned, and his flesh dragged him with it into hell. He went to hell for a week, and after the first break and rescue attempt for another week. There was no room for sympathy, good deeds, approval. She wasn't a woman who looked like this or like that, who was like this or like that. He couldn't speak her name because she had none, like happiness itself, by which she was being ruthlessly ground. He was in a state of distraction in which the taste of a mouth was not perceived, in which no gesture left time to think out another, in which love became a revenge for everything on earth that was bearable. Love was unbearable. It expected nothing, demanded nothing, and gave nothing. It did not allow him itself to be fenced in, cultivated and planted with feelings, but stepped over all boundaries and smashed down all feelings. He had never before been without feelings, without complications. And now, for the first time, he was empty, wrung out. Now he merely felt with deep satisfaction how a wave raised him up at brief intervals towards a rock and hurled him against it and took him back again. He loved. He was free of everything, robbed of all characteristics, thoughts, and aims in this disaster in which nothing was good and bad, or right and wrong, and he was certain that there was no path worthy of the name leading on or out. While everywhere else the others were doing some work, were worrying about actions, he loved completely. It demanded more strength than working or living. The moments glowed. Time became the black track of a fire, and he, from one moment to the next, emerged even more, ever more vitally, as a being of pure definition in which only one single element dominated. He packed his bags, because he realized instinctively that even the first hour of love had already been too much, and with all the strength he had left, he sought refuge in departure. He wrote 3 letters. In the first, he blamed himself for the weakness. In the second, he blamed her. In the third, he renounced any attempt to look for blame and left his address. Please write to me poste restante at Naples, Brindisi, Athens, Constantinople. But he didn't get far. It dawned on him that with his departure everything had collapsed. He had very little money left, having spent the last of what he had to pay for the apartment in advance. To be able to keep it, to be able in spite of everything to keep one place. He loitered about Brindisi harbor, disposed of his belongings apart from 2 suits, and looked for illegal work. But he was apparently no good at such jobs or at facing the dangers which he might now run into. He didn't know what to do next, slept in the open for 2 nights, began to fear the police, to fear dirt, misery, going under. Yes, he would go under. Then he wrote a 4th letter. I've only got 2 suits left, which need pressing, my 2 pipes and the lighter which you gave me. There is no petrol left in it. But if you don't want to see me before the summer, can't separate from N before the summer. Before the summer. And if you still don't know with whom and why and what, for my God. But if you did know, perhaps, I shouldn't know, and I should be in an even more wretched frame of mind. I can no longer see a path in any path. We ought not to have survived it. Before the summer. Then he would have atoned for this year and everything which he was later able to prepare from the material of 30 years promised to become ordinary. Oh, must we really grow old, ugly, wrinkled, and weak-minded, limited and understanding, in order that our lot shall be fulfilled? Nothing against old age, he told himself. I shall be there myself soon, and I can already feel the shudder with which all my years will break over me. Soon. But I am still resisting it. I still won't believe that this light can go out. Youth. This eternally shining light. But as he grew more and more short-winded and a bit dizzy with hunger, and since all his efforts to find work or to move on with his ship, all those senseless enterprises that would have been better suited to a younger man or a lunatic, had come to nothing, he wrote home. He wrote almost the truth, and for the first time asked his father for help. He was in a wretched frame of mind, for he was 30, and in the past he had always managed to get by. He had never been so weak and helpless. He confessed his collapse and asked for money. He was never likely to get money quicker. Before he had recovered from the speedy salvation, he was already on the way back. He traveled via Venice. There, late in the evening, he came to the Piazza San Marco. The stage was empty. The audience had been washed away from the seats. The sea had risen above the sky. The lagoons were full of flickering, since the lamps and lanterns had cast their light down into the water. Light, bright luminosity, far from the rabble. He drifted through like a phantom. From the beginning he had been impelled to seek protection and beauty, in looking, and when he rested in it, he said to himself, "How beautiful! That is beautiful, beautiful. It is beautiful. Let it always be so beautiful. I don't mind if I perish for beauty and what I mean by it, for this more than, for this perfection. I know of no paradise into which I wish to enter after what has been, but my paradise lies where beauty is. I promise not to waste time over it, for beauty is disreputable, not protection anymore, and the pains are already taking a different course." In the past, he had never known how to travel. He used to climb aboard the train with a beating heart and little money. He always arrived in the towns at night when rivers of cautious strangers had long ago seized all the hotel rooms and his friends were already asleep. Once he walked all night long because he could find no bed. On ships he traveled with his heart pounding even louder, and in airplanes he had held his breath with enchantment. But this time he had read the timetable, counted his new luggage, taken a porter. He had a reserved seat and something to read on the journey. He knew where he had to change, and his money did not run out after he had bought a coffee while he was still on the platform. He traveled like a man of distinction, and so calmly that no one could see his intention by looking at him. His intention was to end his wandering life. He wanted to turn round. He was going back into the city which he had loved the most and in which he had to pay taxes, as well as school fees, training fees, and a few other things. He was going to Vienna. Nevertheless, he hesitated to use the word home. He lay down in his compartment with his head on his rolled-up coat and thought. On this bed he would travel through Europe, start awake from dreams, freeze as he approached the familiar mountains, doze, recall painful memories. He wanted to go back to the starting point because he had seen enough of what is called the world. He took a room in a small hotel in the inner town near the post office. He had never lived in a hotel in Vienna. He had been a tenant here, with and without use of bathroom, with and without use of telephone, with relations, with a nurse living on her own who was upset by the smell of his tobacco, with a general's widow whose cats and cactuses he had to look after when she went away to a spa. For 2 days he was so irresolute that he dared not ring anybody up. No one was expecting him. Some people he had failed to write for too long. Others, again, had never answered his letters. He suddenly felt that for various reasons his return was an impossibility. He had no more right to come back than a dead man. No one is allowed to continue from where he broke off. There is nobody, he told himself, nobody who is still counting on me. He shook his meals in a restaurant which, in the past, he would never have dared to enter, read the menu more fluently than elsewhere. He expected to be touched by the names of dishes he hadn't heard for so long, but he wasn't. He recognized the old bells he had missed when midday chimed. Inside him there remained a deadly silence. He ran into acquaintances by chance on the Graben, met more acquaintances, and, encouraged by the significant coincidences, he tacked himself on over-eagerly and awkwardly to everyone. He began uncertainly to talk about the life he had led elsewhere and then broke off because it became clear to him that everybody looked upon his life elsewhere as a betrayal about which it was better to keep silent. He bought a guide to the city in a bookshop, a guide to the city whose every smell he knew and about which he knew nothing worth knowing. He opened the book, sat down with it on a rain-wet bench in the city park, was afraid of catching a cold, and then, obeying the asterisks, went to the great palace containing the collection of armor and to the Museum of Art History, to the Gloriette and to the churches with the Baroque angels. In the evening, at sunset, he went to the Kahlenberg and looked down on the city from a recommended spot. He put his hand over his eyes and thought, "All that is impossible. It is impossible that I have known this city. Not like this." On other days he met friends. He had no idea what they were talking about, yet all the names that cropped up were known to him. And even if the faces that went with them no longer appeared, he knew them all. The labels had remained. He nodded in answer to everything he heard, corroborating, and yet it seemed to him impossible that all this existed. New children of an old girlfriend, changes of occupation, corruption, scandals, prizes, love affairs, business deals. My plan: to arrive. He meets Mole again, the wonder boy, the genius Mole, who at 20 had dazzled everyone, the pure spirit Mole, who in the old days had placed his much-admired studies on the disintegration of values and the crisis of culture at the disposal of a Christian publisher for a song. Mole has become ironical, is very highly paid, hurries from Congress to Congress. Mole, at whom people laugh and who laughs at himself. Mole, who now lives on his old fortune at round-table conferences and does not think the world worthy of any new ideas. Mole, who has to go to the French embassy in the evening and tomorrow morning is acting as advisor to a conference. Mole, still one of the youngest, as slippery as an eel, representing opinions with no opinion of his own. Mole on the butter side. Mole, full of contempt for people with insecure lives, his own one of the most insecure. Mole advises him, jump on the bandwagon. Thieves can't, brought to perfection. Mole superior, Mole with a feeling for everything and everyone whom years ago he despised. Mole's handshake, frugal but firm. Allora, das svidania. Best of luck. See you. Think it over. Write if there's anything you need. He says goodbye to Mole, frugally, returning to the frugal handshake, and goes into his old little cafe. The waiter is taken back, recognizes him, the amiable, sorrowful mannequin. And this time he doesn't have to talk, to shake hands, to make an effort. Words are spared him. A smile is enough. They smile at each other foolishly, two men who have seen a great deal go by them, years, people, good luck, bad luck, and everything the old man wants to express, joy, recollection. He shows it by putting down in front of him precisely those newspapers which he used to ask for and read here. He has to reach for the heap of newspapers. He owes that to the old man. He is glad to owe it to him. At last there is something here which he owes gladly and without resistance. He begins to read at random the headlines, local news, the cultural section, miscellany, the sport reports. The date is unimportant. He could have exchanged the paper for one of 5 years ago. He is only reading the intonation, the unmistakable print, the layout, the structure of the sentences. He knows, as nowhere else, what will be placed in the left-hand top corner and in the right-hand bottom corner, what the newspapers here will consider good and what bad. Only here and there has a new word slipped clumsily in. Suddenly, a man is standing in front of him, a man of his own age, who greets him. He ought to know him, but he simply can't remember who he is. Yes, of course, it is Moll standing there, and he has hurriedly and with pleasure to ask Moll to sit down at his table. Moll, with his shy hunger for culture, who once wanted to discover what the new style was, and who has now found it. Moll, who today knows how people should furnish their homes, paint, write, think and compose. Finally, definitely. The once groping, seeking Moll, fed on the discoveries of a generation that had preceded him, has digested and is ruminating upon what he has devoured. Moll's system, Moll's infallibility, Moll as an art critic, Moll the implacable, obi profanum vulgum, Moll, who has lost his language and instead shows off with 1,000 peacock's feathers from other languages, Moll, who can't read novels anymore, Moll, for whom poetry has no future. Moll, who advocates the castration of music and who wants to alienate painting from the canvas. Moll, frothy, merciless, misunderstood, pointing to the greatness of Gulielmus Apuleiensis, circa 1100. Moll, who of all painters considers Erard Schoen the most astonishing. Moll, who lapses into an indignant silence when a subject is being discussed that is familiar to the other, lives in penury as an auxiliary official, as a collector of obscure texts, as a man who has been overlooked. Moll, jealously intent on being misunderstood and overlooked, revenges himself by corrosive bitterness, punitive looks at every beautiful woman, at a fruit, at a favor, at a Sunday. Moll the martyr. Moll naturally despises him, Moll's old friend, because he now looks at his watch and sees that it is time to go. Moll, who lives according to an inner clock, who winds up his austere spirit, who makes his privilege tick. Thus a day passes in collisions, and he suffers them in a world in which for him all people have become ghosts. He is poorly armed against ghosts. This is also shown by the following day. He meets Moll again, since everyone's world is full of Molls, but this Moll he scarcely remembers. It is the do you remember Moll. It's no use his not having the faintest idea, because Moll remembers everything all the better. Moll reminds him how he, Moll's fellow pupil, first got drunk and couldn't talk without slurring his words, how he had to vomit, and Moll took him home. Moll still remembers the day on which he, Moll's friend, made a gigantic ass of himself. Moll, who holds the negatives of his life in his hand, his bankruptcies, has faithfully preserved his vulgarities. Moll the boon companion, Moll who was in the army with him when they were 18, Moll who in recollection is back in the Wehrmacht, Moll who talks a language that sickens him because it is supposed to make him believe that he once spoke the same language, Moll who beat him up, Moll the stronger, he the weaker. Moll, who calls a spade a spade. What happened to that blonde doll? Marriage that would be the last straw. Moll, who greases palms, who knows his way around, who doesn't let anyone pull the wool over his eyes, who takes women as they want to be taken and sends his bosses to blazes, who knows all about men and all about women. Moll, to whom everything is politics and who doesn't give a damn about politics. Moll, the sponger. Moll, according to whom the war isn't lost yet, not the next one anyhow, who thinks the Italians a gang of thieves, the French effeminate and decadent, the Russians subhuman, and who knows what the English are really like and what the world is really like, a piece of horse trading, a joke, a filthy mess. Moll. But I knew you in the old days. Don't try and fool me. You can't fool me. How is one to avoid Moll? What is the use of striking off one head from the hydra, Moll, when 10 new ones grow in its place? Even if he doesn't remember having given Moll a right to any one of these memories, he knows what it will be like in the future. Moll will pop up everywhere, again and again. Keep your distance, or I shall murder. Keep your distance from me. At the end of one of these nights, in which reunions passed sentences upon him and the others, he was standing in front of a hot dog stall with 3 male figures and a young woman whom in the past he had unsuccessfully wooed for a time. Before this, he had danced with Helena in the bar, moved his mouth about on her shoulder. He hadn't been able to make up his mind to kiss her on the mouth, although he had been certain that this time he could do it. Nevertheless, he went with her to her flat after she had said goodbye to the others, and drank coffee with her. She had a way of talking vaguely, which he immediately adopted again. He had probably talked to her like that in the past, employing intermediate tones, speaking in hints and equivocations, and now nothing could be clear and straight between them anymore. It was late. The room was full of smoke, her scent evaporated. Before he went, he took her, hesitant and utterly exhausted, in his arms. He was very polite. He turned round on the landing and waved, as though he found it hard to go. It was his last act of hypocrisy, and as he made it, he looked into her face, which, growing hard and withered, frightened him away. Outside day had broken, or what pretended to be day. Early light, mist. He reached his hotel, worn out and sleep-shy, and put himself to bed like an invalid, swallowed a couple tablets, and finally gave himself up. He did not wake until it was already evening again, warm and with a stale taste in his mouth from oversleeping, a taste in which all his meetings in the city dissolved. He packed his bags, threw shirts, brushes, shoes into it in confusion, as though he were in a great hurry and tidiness were no longer important. Not till he was at the station did he look for a train, running his finger down the list of departures. He landed in the worst possible train, a local that stopped at every station, and then had to walk up and down half the wintry night in a provincial station whose waiting room was shut, stamping his feet on the ground and clapping his hands. He would have liked to sit down on a luggage trolley and would have fallen asleep forever. But he wasn't cold enough. He wasn't tired enough. His loneliness was not sufficient for such an end. When he continued his journey, he listened to the stories of a fellow traveler who told him what percentage of all the insane believed themselves to be Napoleon, the last Kaiser, Lindbergh, Hitler, or Gandhi. This aroused his interest, and he asked whether one could without harm believe oneself to be oneself, and whether that was not also a form of insanity. The man, probably a psychiatrist, knocked out his pipe, changed the subject, and told him about the percentage and therapies for this, that, and the other percent. He poked about his nose with the pipe cleaner and said, "You, for example, you are sufficient from..." You worry about it too much. Of course we all suffer from that. It's nothing special. The next train carried him through a loathsome night. At the larger stations, the wheels jumped onto other tracks and rolled on full of bitterness, while he, wedged in with 10 people in a compartment, fought for air, looked sideways when the elderly woman beside him breastfed her child, when her husband, the anemic man sitting opposite him, spat after every attack of coughing, and was driven almost mad by another man snoring by the door. Everyone's feet and legs became entangled. Everybody fought for a few inches of space and tried to crowd out the others. He suddenly caught himself spreading his elbows to push back the woman with the child. He was once more in the midst of living people, fighting tenaciously for his position, for his space, for his life. Once he dozed off for a few moments. In his dream, the city came crashing down upon him, with St. Stephen's Cathedral in the van, with its palaces and parks and whole streets. The dream had probably only lasted a second, because he awoke, frightened to death by a blow on the head. He knew at once, without having to think about it, that the train had collided with another. A case had jumped out of the track and struck him. He also knew at once that the collision was a minor one, because it was not a time in which anything could happen to him. No early death, no heart-rending tragedy. After a few hours, they would be able to continue their journey. Everyone was relieved, as after a mild heart attack. No one was injured, the damage slight. He tried to recall the dream about the city which the collision had induced in him, or which had preceded the jolt, and it seemed to him as though now he must never see the city again. But henceforth and forever he would remember what it was like and how he had lived in it. City without surety. Let me not speak of any random city, but of the only one in which my fears and hopes from so many years were caught in a net. I can still see it sitting by the broad, even-tempered river like a big, slatternly fisherwoman, pulling in its silvery and putrefied catch. Silvery the fear, putrefied the hope. By the black water of the Danube and the chestnut sky above the mold-green domes, let me sweep out something of your good spirit from the dust and surrender your evil spirit to the dust. Then may the wind come and sweep away a heart that was proud and offended here. City of flotsam and jetsam. For countries were washed up on you and goods from other countries, the cross-stitch embroidery of the Slovaks and the pitchy mustaches of the Montenegrins, the egg baskets of the Bulgars, and a rebellious accent from Hungary. City of the Turkish moon, city of the barricades. So much crumbled stone, so many hollow walls are there that you can hear a whispering that comes from long ago, from far away. Oh, all the nights that come about in Vienna, so many bitter nights. And all the days that are through to you, accompanied by the buzz from schools and mental hospitals, from old age homes and sick rooms, little aired and rarely painted with white paint, all the days around which shy chestnut blossoms swarm. Oh, all the windows that never opened, all the gates as though there were no way out through any gate, as though the sky didn't exist. Terminal city! As though no railway line ran out of it, an atmosphere of aulic councillors and retirement in government offices. Never a harsh word in the ante-rooms, always a hurtful one, always delay, never dismiss. There is the question of whether one has to love what one does not want to love. But the city is beautiful, and the ceremonious poet climbed onto the tower of St. Stephen's and paid homage to it. It is all a question of giving way, of concurrence. But some drank the cup of hemlock unconditionally, Evil report has entered into agreement with the soft heart, but some had a heart with a wild jocular muscle and a speech that would have been accepted in Rome. They were hostile, hated, and lonely. They thought precisely, kept themselves pure, and left the scum to themselves. A few had words at their disposal, which they sent like fireflies into the approaching night and over the frontiers, and one had a forehead that glowed blue and tragic between the tides of speechlessness. City of the pier, in which the most magnificent music is thrown into the flames, in which that which came from the upright heretics, the impatient suicides, the thorough discoverers, and everything that originated from the most honest spirit is spat upon and slandered. City of silence, mute inquisitress, with the non-committal smile. But the sobbing from loose cobblestones when someone staggers over them, young, flayed by silence, murdered by smiling. Where to with the cry rising out of a tragedy? City of actors, city of frivolous angels and a handful of demons ripe for the pawn shop. Shy city in dialogue, shy germ in a conversation of tomorrow. City of wits, of lick-spittles, of boon companions. For the point of a joke, a truth is sacrificed, and well said is half-lied. Plague city with the smell of death, by the black water of the Danube and the dirty oil in the distance. Let me think of the radiance of a day that I have also seen, green and white and sober after fallen rain. When the city was washed and purified, when the streets ran out star-shaped from its core, its strong heart purified, when the children on every floor began to practice a new etude, when the trams came back from the central cemetery with all the wreaths and bunches of asters from the previous year, because there was resurrection from death, from oblivion. About the end of the journey, he said nothing. He hadn't wanted to end it, but to disappear at the end of it, without trace, impossible to find. He had finally found secret means of getting a job that would have taken him to Indonesia. War broke out in Indonesia when he went to buy the tickets. The job fell through and he no longer wanted to look for another in order to get to another foreign country. He took it as a sign that he was not to go. He stayed in Rome. He had thought of it like this: to go away with her whose name he dared not utter, to flee with her, never again to come back to Europe, simply to live with her where there was sunshine, where there was all kinds of fruits. To live with her body, no longer linked with anything else and far from everything that had been till then. To live in her hair, in the corner of her mouth, in her lap. He had always loved the absolute and setting off towards it, and she was the first person who had given him the wish, linked with another person, to set off towards it and to take the other with him. At all moments, when the extreme image floated before his eyes, when it was near enough to touch, he became a prey to fever, lost his speech, was consumed with the desire to find a language for it. He had been consumed with the desire to be able to take a step towards the place where the extreme solution lay for him, and he wanted to act accordingly, ruthlessly. But then somebody always came up to him, brought him a letter reminding him of some duty undertaken previously, of someone who was sick, of a relation, of someone passing through on a journey, or of the deadline for a job. Or at the moment when he wanted to cast aside all shackles, someone had to cling on to him like a drowning man. "Leave me alone. Leave me in peace," he had said then, going to the window as if there was something special to be seen outside. "But we must clear things up today. Who started it all? Who first said, 'I don't remember what I said. Leave me in peace, will you?' And why did you come home so late? Why did you slip through the door so quietly? Weren't you trying to hide something or your own self?" "I wasn't trying to hide anything. Leave me alone. Can't you see that I'm dying, that I'm crying?" All right, you're crying, you're dying. But why? You're terrible, and you don't know what you're saying. No, he doesn't know that. He has so often asked for peace without knowing why, only so that at last he can lie down, so that at last he can put out the light, turn his eyes in the darkness to the distance which he had been dissuaded from going to. Leave me in peace, do leave me in peace for once. He wants at least to be able to think over why he has given up his plan to disappear, to make himself invisible. He can't make it out, but it will become clear. Like every creature on earth, he doesn't reach any conclusion. He doesn't want to live like just anyone, nor like somebody special. He wants to move with the times and stand against them. He is drawn to praise old comforts, to defend an old beauty, a parchment, a column. But he is also drawn to play modern things off against the ancient ones, a reactor to a turbine, a synthetic material. He wants to rebel, and he doesn't want to. He tends to understand weakness, error, and stupidity, and he would like to combat them, to pillory them. He tolerates and doesn't tolerate, hates and doesn't hate, can't tolerate and can't hate. That too is a reason for disappearing. In his diary for that year stand the sentences, I love freedom, which comes to an end in everything that stands firm. I want to bring to light black earth and catastrophes, but there too it would come to an end, I know. Since there is no natural prohibition and no natural command, so that not only what pleases is allowed, but also what does not please, and who knows what pleases. Countless legal and moral systems are possible. Why do we confine ourselves to a few mixed systems about which everyone has always fretted? In mankind's moral household, which is run now economically, now uneconomically, piety and anarchy always reign side by side. The tables lie around in disorder like the Revelations. Why have only a few systems gained dominion? Because we cling so tenaciously to habits, from fear of thinking without tables of prohibitions and commandments, from fear of freedom. Men do not love freedom. Wherever it has come into being, they have quarreled with it. I love freedom, which I too must betray 1,000 times over. This unworthy world is the result of the uninterrupted spurning of freedom. The freedom, I mean, the permission, since God has not defined the world in any respect and has done nothing to change the way it is, to recreate and rearrange it. The permission to dissolve all forms, starting with moral forms, so that all others can dissolve. The destruction of all belief, of every kind of belief, in order to destroy the reasons for all conflicts. The renunciation of every traditional view and every traditional condition of states, churches, organizations, means of power, arms, education. The great strike, the instantaneous stoppage of the old world, the cessation of work and thinking for this old world, the dismissal of history, not for the sake of anarchy, but for the sake of a fresh start. Prejudices, racial prejudices, class prejudices, religious prejudices, and all others remain an outrage, even when they vanish through education and insight. The elimination of injustice, of oppression, all mitigation of harshness, every improvement of a situation still maintain the disgraces of the past. The disgraces, maintained by the continued existence of the words, may therefore be re-established at any moment. No new world without a new language. Meanwhile, it has become spring. A lake of sunshine swims in his room. In the little square outside the building, the children, the motor horns, the birds are exulting. He has to force himself to go on writing the letter. Dear Sirs. He doesn't write the truth to the dear sirs. That out of indifference, exhaustion, and because he can't think of anything better to do. He wants to eat humble pie. Eat humble pie. What nonsense. No more exaggeration at all costs. Referring to your kind offer, it is a kind offer, isn't it? It will be adequate, and there is really no reason to think himself too good for it. On the 1st of the month, as you request, I shall be at your disposal. I hope. He doesn't hope anything. He doesn't think anything over. There will be plenty of time in which to occupy himself with the future place and the future work. He agrees to all the terms and makes none himself. He sticks up the envelope quickly and without hesitating and puts it in the post. He packs his belongings, calls the porter in charge of the flats, runs through the inventory with him, and leaves the apartment in which he has never been at home. But there is still plenty of time till the 1st of the month, so he sets off by a roundabout route, slowly and with relish, through the Italian provinces. In Genoa he is seized by the desire to wander again, as in his youth, as after the time of his imprisonment, when he found his way back on foot from the war into which he had traveled by an express train. He sends his baggage on ahead and walks across country between the awakening rice fields towards the north. And because on the second evening he is dead tired from the unaccustomed exertion, he does something he hasn't done for a long time. He stands on the edge of the autostrada to Milan and tries to thumb a lift. It is getting dark, but no one will pick him up until, quite without hope now, he once more signals to a car from a distance. And this car stops, quietly, almost soundlessly. Awkwardly he tells the man at the wheel, who is alone, what he wants. Feeling as dirty as a tramp and therefore intimidated, he sits down beside him. He sits for a long time in silence, occasionally looking at the man surreptitiously from the side. He must be his own age. He likes the face. He likes the hands that are resting loosely on the steering wheel. His eyes travel on and come to rest on the speedometer, where the needle is going up quickly, from 100 to 120 and then to 140. He didn't dare to say that he would prefer to go slower, that he was suddenly afraid of all speed. He is in no hurry to get back into an ordered life. The young man suddenly said, "I never pick anyone up ordinarily," and then, as if to apologize for his driving, "I have to be in the city center before midnight." He looks again at the man, who gazes unwaveringly ahead where the headlamps are unraveling the black tangle of forest, telegraph poles, walls and bushes. He now feels calmer and curiously comfortable, but he would like to talk and feel the man's light-colored eyes, which had only glided briefly over him before, directed at him again. Yes, they must be light-colored. He wanted it so, and he wanted to speak, and, for example, to ask the man whether this year was also so difficult for him, and what was to be done, and what one was to think of it all. Inside himself he began to carry on a conversation with the man, while in the low front seats, like two schoolboys put together for a lesson. They were carried through the night, a vast night in which all objects appeared vast and unfamiliar. A lorry emerged in front of them. They approached it fast, swung out, but when they were level with it, the lorry swung out as well to turn down a side road. They sped a few yards forward and into a wall. When he came to again, he noticed that he was being lifted up. He immediately lost consciousness again, occasionally felt a slight jolt, guessed at moments what was happening to him. He must be in a hospital, on a mobile bed. Someone gave him an injection, talked over the top of him. Only when they were in the operating theater did his head clear. Preparations were in progress. 2 doctors in masks were busy at a table. A woman doctor came up to him, reached for his arm, rubbed it. The rubbing tickled a bit, was pleasant. Suddenly it dawned on him that the situation was serious, and he thought quite quietly that he would never wake up again if they plunged him in his sleep. He wanted to say something, sought with his tongue for his voice, and was glad when he brought out a few words fluently. He asked for a piece of paper and a pencil. A nurse brought him both, and now, as the anesthetic slowly began to work, he held the pencil, put it to the paper that the nurse held out to him, supported on something flat. He carefully wrote, "Dear parents." Then he quickly crossed out these two words and wrote, "Dearest." He stopped and thought hard. Screwing it up, he gave the paper back to the nurse and shook his head to indicate that there was no point. If he never woke up again, letters like that could have no further sense. He lay there heavy-lidded and waited, wonderfully relaxed for unconsciousness. This year has broken his bones. He lies in the hospital with a few artistic blue and red scars and does not count the days till the removal of the plaster armor under which he promises to heal. The unknown man, he has now learned, was killed on the spot. He sometimes thinks of him, staring at the ceiling. He thinks of him as someone who has died in his place, and he sees him in front of him with that bright tension in his face, the young, firm hands on the wheel, sees him racing at the center of the darkness in the world and there going up in flames. It is now May. The flowers in his room are changed every day for fresher and more colorful ones. The roll blinds are left down for hours in the middle of the day, and the scent in the room is preserved. If he could now see his face, it would be that of a young man, and he wouldn't doubt that he is young, for he felt ancient only when he was very much younger, let his head hang and hunched his shoulders because his thoughts and his body troubled him too much. When he was very young, he wished an early death for himself, didn't want to live even to be 30. But now he wished for life. In those days, only the punctuation marks for the world had rocked to and fro in his head. But now there came to him the first sentences in which the world as a whole appeared. In those days he had imagined that he could think everything through to the end, and had scarcely noticed that he was taking only the very first steps into a reality which it was impossible to think through to the end immediately, and which still withheld a great deal from him. For a long time he had also not known what to believe, and whether it was not altogether disgraceful to believe anything. Now he was beginning to believe himself when he did or said something. He was gaining confidence in himself. He also trusted the things he did not have to prove to himself, the pores in his skin, the salty taste of the sea, the fruit-laden air, and everything that was corporeal. When, shortly before his discharge from hospital, he looked in a mirror for the first time, because he wanted to comb his hair himself, and he saw himself thoroughly familiar and at the same time a little more transparent, sitting up in front of the mountain of pillows behind him. He discovered in the midst of the clammy brown hair something white and shining. He felt it, moved the mirror closer. A white hair! His heart pounded in his throat. He gazed at the hair foolishly and fixedly. Next day he picked up the mirror again, fearing to find more white hairs. But there was still only the one, and so it remained. In the end he said to himself, "I'm alive, and it is my wish to remain alive for a long time." How could the white hair, that pale proof of pain and the beginning of age, have frightened me so? Let it stay there, and if after a few days it falls out and another one does not appear so quickly, I shall retain a foretaste and never again feel fear of the process that is being made physically visible to me. I'm alive. He will soon be healed. He will soon be thirsty. The day will come, but no one will strike a gong and announce it. No, the day will not come. It was already there. contained in all the days of this year which he has survived with an effort and at a pinch. He is actively concerned with what lies ahead, thinks about work, and wishes soon to be able to go out through the gate down below, away from the victims of accidents, the infirm, and the moribund. I say unto thee, rise up and walk. None of your bones is broken. Dear Hell Travelers, I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a fun read for me. I literally read it in one sitting, and I didn't mind, and I like it. This is, something I read often, and I'm glad to share it, something I can't quite do with the other channel perhaps. And yeah, it's a late night again, but no regrets. Never any regrets. I hope you don't have any either. And if you're tired, I hope this is a good place for you to rest your bones. Hope you stay by. And if you made it this far, of course, thank you for watching.